Hello, sisters. Welcome to the season two of the Rising Feminine Online Temple, which is a 7 days initiation for women to journey back to their true essence. My name is Junita D'Souza, your feminine lifestylist and the keeper of this online temple, where I have gathered visionaries from around the world to join forces and initiate you in your authentic feminine. And a big part of my work as a feminine lifestylist is to invite women to indulge into everyday simple small rituals so that they begin to feel nurtured, nourished, and fulfilled in their busy lifestyles. So, as part of this online temple, I invite you to create some sacred container, maybe light a candle, grab your journal, or gift yourself this time to really receive the offerings of the teachers present in this online temple because each one of them have a very special message for you. And in this special edition of the Rising Feminine Online Temple, I have invited the masculine presence because the Rising Feminine is just not about women, for women, or happening to women. It's a co-creation that we all have to initiate ourselves into. So joining us today is Freddy Zental, where he will guide us on a conversation where we're going to talk some really juicy stuff about how a woman can inspire a man to embody his divine masculine and much more. But before we begin, let me read a little bit about Freddy to you so that you get an idea of his sacred work in this world too. Freddy Zenta has assisted thousands of men and women create lasting intimacy and fulfillment in their relationships. He's featured on Showtime's documentary series Sexual Healing and the Emmy Award-winning NBC show Starting Over, best-selling author of Sexual Enlightenment, endorsed by world-renowned spiritual pioneer Dr. Michael Beckwith, and the co-founder of Tantra Nova Institute in Chicago. He has coached billionaires, innovators, and power couples all over the world, shared his intimacy secrets at a global Young Presidents Organization conference in the City of Love, Paris, and also has been regularly present in premier retreat locations such as Kripalu Center for Yoga and Health and Isalon. Welcome, Freddy.
Hi, Janita. Thank you so much for doing the work you're doing and inviting me in.
It's so amazing that in this online temple, I am interviewing 10 women and I selected two men to join in because I feel that it's really interesting to see and hear the same information many times, but from a man's perspective. And it's so important for women to hear it from different angles. You know, many times the information is the same, but it feels good to feel the masculine presence. So I'm really grateful for you to join us.
Yeah, it's great. You can't hear it enough, in all the different ways that one could hear it. One way might be easier for another to hear it, but it's important for us to get the information out there and people can start having and making a difference in the transformation that is afoot.
Yes, and I must also say to the women watching that I've been following Freddy and his partner's work, Elspeth, for quite some time. They are this, I was telling Freddy that they are this sacred union for me. They represent, the yin and the yang. Every time I look at them, they talk and their presentation, it's like they just know when to stop and when the other person should begin, that's very good timing. And I always wonder, like, wow, that's like the dance of the masculine and the feminine. So I'm so happy to have you.
It's so true because she's shorter, well, average height, and then I'm tall, 6'4", and I'm dark and she's light, and so we are definitely the yin-yang balance there. So we've been teaching with our institute in Chicago for 17 years now, sharing practices for men and women to learn sex consciousness and how to work consciously with our life force energy to empower our dreams and what we want to create in our lives. So I look forward to getting into this with you.
Great. So before I jumped into our conversation, our call today, I just did a quick meditation to tune into our energies, and I also pulled up a goddess card so that I could ground myself with our conversation and bring in some higher forces together. And Mary Magdalene, unconditional love, showed up. And I was just thinking, wow, this is just exactly what I was thinking, about, and your work is also so much close to it.
Yes, yes, sexual spiritual connection, absolutely.
Yeah, so I just wanted to quickly ask you if you find any resonance with Mary in this present moment in this goddess card.
Well, you know, I think if Jesus came back, they'd probably crucify him again because we still are trying to understand as a society and get what that energy is. There's so many things that are happening in the news and in the world now between men and women, the Me Too movement and men's unconsciousness around sexual self, that we're at a critical mass where we can really make a difference now in how we are living with each other and in our lives, creating more of nirvana in reality. So yeah, the Mary Magdalene energy and the loving openness around our sexual selves. Uh, you know, what we teach at Tantra Nova, you could actually teach to nuns and priests if they were vowed to celibacy. It's really about getting the essence of that energy as it exists for us as a creative life force and a pleasurable life force. And what's interesting, Jonita, is when you bring consciousness to the sexual, creativity and pleasure start showing up in areas of life that seem completely unrelated to sex, just in the simple process of living itself. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's true. It's all connected and interlinked with our
Hmm.
sexual energy.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
And in the mainstream, it's really difficult to associate Mary Magdalene with the sexual energy. But knowing about some of her lineage work, I know how much of it was a contribution in the sexual energy as well, in terms of Mary Magdalene and the Tantric Union of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, pretty much. Yeah. So yeah, I'm really
Yeah,
excited.
you know, you think about sexual energy because it's pretty loaded, you know, with shame and fear and guilt and story. But when we are in that energy, we're more open, loving, vulnerable, receptive. Chemically, we're changed. Oxytocin's released, endorphin, serotonin, the feel-good hormones. So we're in a chemical state of ease, and we're in a loving, emotional state. And that's really what the whole message of spirituality is about in any whatever dogma you might believe. Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, Judaism, Confucianism, whatever it might be. And the core of most of these religions is this connection with pleasurable, spiritual, seeing ourselves in each other.
Yeah, so I'm curious, Freddy, how did you begin this work? How did you get into creating Tantra Nova Institute and like how did this all happen for you?
Sure, Jonita, I'd love to share that. So for me, I was lucky to have a father who was a psychiatrist and was really enrolled very passionately in his own personal transformation and growth. When I was going through my puberty, living in the beautiful islands of Hawaii, spending a lot of time in the shower, I was 13 years old. And well, my father probably thought I was going to hurt myself in there. So he gave me a book to read on how to integrate meditation and sex practices. So that was my first introduction to working consciously with my breath and working with my ejaculatory
At the
reflex
age of 13.
at the age of 13.
Wow.
Lots of sexual energy. My girlfriend loved it. I loved it. I even transmuted the energy to be a better athlete. I wound up getting a scholarship playing basketball in college. After college, I continued to read and do workshops and apply these principles and practices in my relationships. And well, I never thought I would teach this. I taught school with the Unified School District for a while in LA. I did music professionally for a while, movie business. And then settled in the software business for a long time in San Francisco. And knowing what I knew about this work and being inspired about your life, after about 15 years in that industry, I had pretty much waned in my inspiration about it. It was just a job. So I was looking for a new opportunity in the same field, in the software marketing field. And so there was an opportunity in Chicago, and the company flew me out here, and we got along and worked out. So they moved me out here, and that was 17 years ago. I really didn't know I was coming out here to meet my partner, Elsbeth. I was single at the time, and I was online looking for Shakti, a female Tantra partner. And she had her profile online, and we met, and it was kismet. We almost immediately started this work, and we started, we transcended the romantic drama, and our baby became this work, Tantra Nova, which has fulfilled both of us in so many ways, individually and collectively. sharing practices of sex consciousness and meditation all over the world now, books and tapes and thousands of couples and individuals. I've had a one-man show called Sexual Enlightenment that I've been performing all over the world for the last 12 years, singing and drumming and telling stories. The whole idea there is to demystify sex, love, and intimacy in a sort of an edutainment way. Yeah, so it's been really fun and fulfilling in so many ways, and we continue to expand the business and the work that we're doing and our love for each other. So, and this is a part of it. Now these summits like you're doing now it's a great way to get the word out, get people inspired in their own process.
That's true. Oh my God, what a journey.
Yeah.
So, Freddie, I want to go into some of the conversations that I've been having with the women that I work with, and some of the common questions that they keep asking me and the challenges they face. So when a woman, let's say, begins her journey of discovering herself, and she identifies like, okay, I want something more, and then she discovers new modalities, and she goes into practicing all of that. And then a lot of women share with me that they face the hardship of going back to their partner and explaining that to themselves. And many women even try to force those changes on their partner, like, I'm going through this, so, why don't you get this?
Yes.
So I wanted to hear your opinion and your experience of working with couples. How do you think a woman who is in her journey of initiation and discovering herself, her sacred feminine and her sexuality and things, how does she go to her man and start the conversation?
Well, we work, as you said, with a lot of couples and individuals, and couples oftentimes they come together with a collective concern, an individual concern. It could be they want more sex or they want more intimacy or whatever it might be. So they're both enrolled. We do have people who come who maybe are in a couplehood, but they come alone and they're going to take it to their partner or however that's going to work out. I think ultimately, to answer your question, Jonita, is that if someone is doing their own transformational work, then they're committed to their transformational work within the relationship, and the other has to do their transformational work. Ultimately to create more harmony in whatever might be disharmony in the relationship, however that might work. So if one does this work and it works for them and someone does something else and it works for them, ultimately it's about ending the suffering. So whatever the disconnect is within the relationship, then what happens with this work is that it doesn't stick around as long. So I would say someone is going to create someone that's going to resonate with them. Sometimes relationships end because people grow out of it, so that's sometimes a hard truth, but we all die in the end. So the bottom line is, how can we continue to be happy and listen to our joy and be authentically actualized in our lives?
Yeah, and one of the things that I want to ask you is that when a woman, let's say, like she's beginning to understand, and usually it's more when you see in a relationship, I have noticed from my personal experience is that it's always the women going into this spiral first, and then she either pulls in her partner or they separate out, as you say, like they fall apart because the energies just don't match anymore. And what many women share with me is that what they can see is a wounded masculine. Like there's so much of hype about the patriarchy and emasculation of men, and there is a notion that women who are in the journey of empowerment, feminine empowerment, kind of hate men, and which is not the case. It's not about who is better, who is not, but
exactly.
How can she address this wounded masculine in her partnership?
Well, for men, it's really about, and I teach men's workshops, and one of the things that's imperative for men to get is the integration of the masculine-feminine dynamic. So when we are, for instance, in biology, digesting in the womb, and we're zygotes, we're androgynous. And then, for whatever reason, decided man or woman, and as grown adults, men and women, we have aspects of testosterone and estrogen in our systems, more or less based on our gender. And as we get older, the whole system reverses itself. Men grow breasts and women grow hair on their faces. So what we're really wanting to do is integrate this masculine and feminine as mature adults in the way that we socialize, the way we are in our psychology, and how we are in our relationships. So if a man feels emasculated by a woman because she's in her power, then there's a balance that happens there. So in relationship, there's usually one that's more or less in the masculine or the feminine, and it vibrates back and forth. So for the man, it's really to be, it takes as much energy, focus, willingness to be strong, to listen, to make requests, and to make changes, and to be your word, and to also work to allow and support the other to be fully who they are, not coming from a manipulative place or a jealous place or a fearful place. It takes as much energy to be fearless, and that is where men need to wake up. So in our work, in my work with men, it's really about broadening the emotional experience, because for men, we start with, hold it together, don't show your emotions, and we're kind of, yes, we're like denser instruments, duller instruments in a sense. So, because a woman is much more capable physiologically of cognating left brain, right brain, emotional, analytical. We're either fighting or we're loving, and it doesn't happen real quick. We can develop an internal listening, which women are kind of already gifted with that. They have the baby and they can listen internally, and there's an intuitive awareness. For men, it requires a little more focus and practice. So a man really needs to be committed to that, to really learn how to support his goddess in a way that she can be strong and that he can be grounded, and that they can, really support each other in who they are.
And what if that does not happen, or what if that doesn't work out? So what suggestion would you like to give to the women in this instance, for example?
Well, one of the first things that we share with people is the belly breath. We have three major distinctions: the belly breath, the witness state of mind, and energetic awareness. But I would share with your listeners today just a short meditation, if I could.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
So this is just a short meditation. Your eyes can be open, closed, or soft focus. If you're in a seated position, just uncross your legs and bring your awareness to your breath. Follow your breath into your nose, down your trachea, lungs, extending into your diaphragm and belly like a big balloon. You may put a hand on your belly. So as you inhale, fill your hand up with your belly like a big balloon through the nose. And then follow the breath back up and out through the nose in your own pace, depth, and rhythm. Letting your thoughts come, letting your thoughts go. Feeling the rise of your belly on your inhalation. Flattening of your belly on your exhalation. So in this place, focusing on the breath, the thoughts will come. Don't give it a lot of attention. Just let it be, let it go. Bring your awareness, again, following your breath into your nose, trachea, lungs, extending the breath down into the diaphragm and into the belly like a big balloon on your inhalation. Exhaling back up and out in your own pace, depth, and rhythm through your nose. Letting your thoughts come, letting your thoughts go. Stay with it just a few more breaths. Beautiful. So that's parasympathetic breathing. And that is to be practiced every day. If someone does that 10 breaths in the morning, just put their hand on their belly before they get out of bed, rise and fall. It takes a few minutes. What will eventually start to show up is a little distance from the drama or the upset or the disconnect that starts to happen through the day. Because something happens, we have a reaction to it, and then there's the total felt sense of that, the tummy tight or the sweatness or the tight back or the heart racing or blood pressure up. And we start to step away and watch all of that happening. And then what happens is it doesn't stick around as long. And then from that place, we can make either a request to be heard about something, or listen to a request, or look at what we want to create. And it becomes a deeper listening. So we're not so in our head. We start to get more connected to our body and to just being the watcher, and also living into an intention of what we want to create. So to answer your initial question of what does one do when the other is not enrolled in what you're doing, and yet there's still a problem. Is that the question?
Yes, exactly.
So one must decide what one's going to do to keep being in their joy, in their bliss, and on their path. So there's a lot of things you can request in relationship. You can, negotiate something, if it's like, well, we don't go on holiday enough. You could say, well, okay, let's negotiate an agreement to try for 3 months. And we have 2 holidays in that 3 months, and then see where we're at the end of the 3 months. So you can negotiate relationship. That's not something that people often like to do, because they feel like, oh, well, if you love each other, you shouldn't have to do that. And sometimes you need to construct way to change behavior. So, but the meditation is the first piece that I would share with your listeners to start doing, to really deepen what you're creating in your relationships and in your life.
Yeah, and just breathing, just focusing on the breathing, it automatically cuts off your mind chatter. Like, you can't focus on these 2 things together at the same time.
It becomes very apparent, whether you meditate or not, that there's a story in your mind going, how long is this going to last? Or, am I pushing my belly out, or whatever. We have a million thoughts in a nanosecond. So it starts to, again, develop the capacity that we're more than our thoughts. Yeah. And then what happens in our work is we start, after some of the foundational pieces, we start working, teaching people how to work consciously with their sexual energy. So we don't go right to the sexual piece, because it feels good and it's great anyway. And forever we've been, creating babies, new life, and then the last 100 or so years recreating with the development of contraceptives. And what we're sharing is how to co-create with this intelligent energy, and there is a systemic intelligence to it.
That's amazing how much our body is capable of as well.
Yeah. So much pleasure, and we miss so much in a lot of the rationalized suffering story mind that we live in, Yet when we deepen the listening and we start listening from a creative, pleasurable place, which is that sexual energy, then that becomes the default listening. Instead of, well, I hate my job, 30 more years of retirement, I'm thinking, well, that really doesn't even feel good as a conversation, so I really, what do I appreciate about with my work, So
that's right. So when in your work with couples, what would you say is the most common challenge that they come to you with, according to your experience? What has been?
Well, again, it is this unconsciousness often of the man, because the man starts feeling in his lingam, which is the penis, the wand of light, and the woman starts feeling in her heart, her 4th chakra, before her yoni, vagina, her sexual energy awakens. So for men, she's like, I don't know if he really loves me. All he wants to do is screw. And he's like, of course I love you. And he's pointing at his heart on, And it's like, so for the man to learn how to, one, separate ejaculation and bring that energy up to his heart, then he starts to step away from what appears often to the woman as just lust or selfish love. And then once that happens, often in relationship, and a lot of couples we work with, this is kind of a typical thing, then she begins to feel heard and loved and listened to. And he begins to step a little bit away from his automatic way of being. So that's one of the common things that really starts to shift a lot for couples that come to us. For the man to start to wake up around that unconscious, what appears to be lusting automaticity. Because forever men have been lauded for their sexual prowess, harems and, playboys. And the first time a guy has sex, he tells his dad, he says, oh, you're a man now, And for a woman, it's been more of a repression of the sexual energy. Even in parts of the world today, a woman could be stoned to death for having sex out of wedlock. We're still as draconian as we were, 5,000 years ago in some areas of this. So for the woman, it's discovering the power of her sexual energetic self. And for the man, it's bringing discipline and consciousness to the unconscious self, sexual self.
Yeah, and what would you like to say in terms of the divine masculine and the divine feminine? What does the divine masculine has to say to the divine feminine?
The divine masculine has to say, you're my goddess, and you are the bringer of life, and the intuitive, emotionally connected dancer. And we are the grounded energy, we are the more linear energy, and the support. So, in that dance, again, it plays back and forth, because in relationships, sometimes he's more in his feminine sometimes, and she's more in her masculine. And there's a foundational grounding for both. So it's important for both to get that there is a balance and a dance, and to listen to that dance in all of its aspects and where it shows up in relationship, emotionally, psychologically, physically, and to bring consciousness so that there can be a balance and more fun and not a stuckness. So.
Yeah, when they talk about, there's a lot of talk about like what the woman wants from the man, in the sense that a woman wants his man to be present and just to listen and not offer solutions, and like she just wants to be heard, and basically her desire is to be seen and heard and witness his presence. And what would you say what a man would like from the woman in an ideal situation? Because we don't get to hear that much of the man's perspective.
Right. Well, it's interesting, because when the woman says, I want you to be strong, and I want you to take control, and I want you to be in your power, and it's like that kind of a thing. What it does for the man is it produces more estrogen. There's three things. One can be more aggressive and fight that conversation. Two, one can just leave. Three, one can become more passive in that space. So for the woman to really be able to support the man in his masculine, it's about being connected with herself around what is seemingly crazy in the masculine. How we go about things. I said earlier, we're like blunter instruments. So some of the things that we like to do are scary for a woman in terms of just going into something. Maybe it seems to be unprepared, or doing something that's a little more haphazard, or doing something just in maybe sometimes seemingly a forceful way, to allow the man to dance in that masculine. It seems like crazy for the man or for the woman to just let that happen. So again, it comes back to the belly breath, to be able to breathe through whatever anxieties are there, and to begin to just allow the man to be who he is. That's the biggest piece, I would say.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because it's, again, the dance you say. If a woman wants to be seen in her entire spectrum of emotions, then she has to be present for that, for the opposite to happen as well, for the masculine to be dancing in his entire spectrum of the masculine too.
Exactly, Janita. For instance, Elspeth and I've been riding Harley Davidsons for a long time. And so I do these longer trips, and, Elspeth a few years ago didn't want me to go, but I was going anyway. And so I went with not necessarily her blessing, but once I was gone, she, had more fun hanging out and doing what she wanted to do too. And now it's not such a big thing. But my point there is that she wasn't comfortable with something, and I could have said, well, I'm not going to do this thing, which would have been the repression of my own dance.
The wild masculine.
Yeah, and so she was able to breathe through her anxiety about me going away, and I danced, and then she opened up and danced, and we came back together. And that's just sort of an example of, in so many places I hear where the man doesn't do something because she won't like it, and then it's like, okay, what kind of life is that?
Yeah, and if we are in this journey of spirituality, then we must be able to create the space for this conscious man, and that can also not be an easy thing, because a conscious person respects their freedom.
Right, right. And you know, one of the opportunities in relationship is to learn how to allow the other to be fully who they are and support that. And that really is an egoless thing.
Yeah, I must say that was challenging for me in my marriage as well to allow, that freedom, because you always worry that, oh, what if he just leaves? If he's too free, what if he just never comes back? But it was about me understanding and trusting my own self, my own worth. And the moment I was able to tap into that, the masculine is always attracted anyways. That's the reason they are there with us.
Right. Now, the thing that's different between, because you could love anyone. You could, like you said, if he leaves or she doesn't, if she leaves, you could love a stranger on the street that you don't even know. If you liked each other and the way you smelled, you could have sex with them and so on, and love them just like you could your husband or your wife. Now, the difference though between that and your relationships is your agreements. So you want to make clear agreements with each other, whether it's monogamous and sexual or open or polyamorous, whatever it might be, but that you have an agreement and you trust each other's word and you live in that until you want to change that. Again, though, this is so loaded that we don't even approach it in an honest way or a logical way or a way that is going to work for both people. Just do what they do. They don't say anything and so on. So that's where one really can begin to be freer in what they want to create in their life when they're really clear with their agreements and what they want. And that's something that is right now having to be learned for people because, we are not often as children raised to really trust our own intuitive self, to be in our power, to be, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel that in relationships, we just trigger each other's wounds and we have to identify that and work on it. Because for me, I remember that my husband started saying, you being too needy. You being too needy. Just let me be. Like, what do you want? What do you want from me? And the level of frustration. And I started to question that, why am I being so needy? Yeah, like what is going on inside of me, and what is it that I'm not giving myself? That I'm projecting on the other person. It's
Yeah,
always
well,
the work is from within.
yeah, often what happens when we get into relationship is all of the family stuff comes up. So the neediness started probably a long time ago, if that was the case, so maybe something happened in the family where you felt like you weren't loved or weren't acknowledged, and who knows, because family dynamics are crazy. So we relive all of whatever traumas, dramas we had then in our relationships when we create our own families. So the opportunity again in relationship is to transcend a lot of that stuff, because my upset is my upset. Exactly. If I'm upset, if something I'm triggered by is triggered by something she's doing, wearing, saying, or being or doing, that's my trigger. And that's really the first key that, the egolessness around our own transformation, that if it's my trigger, it's my trigger and what's there. So what was there for him too about that he was triggered by your neediness.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we just have to, work it out, like we had to go separately and do our own work and then come back together and then see, again, as you said, the agreements that we make in the relationship.
Yeah.
So for the women who are single, let's say, and how can they create space for the masculine? What do you suggest for single women who are looking to invite a beautiful relationship in their life?
It's funny because sometimes we get people and they say, oh, single woman, I want a relationship. Okay. How long have you been single? Most of my whole life. Okay, I've always been single. So it's like, okay, so there's something that maybe they're not seeing that they're doing that creates being single. I mean, there's a lot to be said about being single too. So maybe what oftentimes we say we want is not really what we want in practice. So for those who really truly do want relationship, to just go ahead and get in relationship, because there's always, no one is the perfect. The perfection's in the perfecting, meaning it's always shifting. So I think if you have a certain way of being, then you're going to create someone that's going to resonate with that. If you were in a relationship, you did some transformational work, and now your listing is different, then that resonance is what's going to happen. And then it's ongoing, because stuff's not going to not happen in relationship. There's always going to be something that comes up, particularly as you get closer. and the honeymoon ends. It's after about 3 years, the honeymoon's over, you know? And so that's where the work really begins.
Yeah, yeah. And you cannot avoid it. You can't wait for the perfect guy to show up. You have to get into this.
Right. And so if we don't have tools that can assist us in coming back to this savasana, this belly breath, that's just being and breathing and living into a possibility, then we're lost and doomed to our story making and our old experiences and our so on, triggers.
Amazing. It's been amazing talking to you, Freddy, and I like how you are sharing your experiences of your work and the work with a couple. And I would love to know about the free gift that you're sharing with the women today.
Yeah. Now, can you tell me about it? Because I know Elspeth sent it to you, and you sent it out to your people. It's a download, I believe, of the sexual spiritual connection.
I think it's intimacy, creating intimacy.
Creating intimacy, and it's not our book though. It's our DVD.
It's a DVD, yes.
Yeah, it's a DVD. So yeah, so that is a gift for your listeners that will introduce them further to what we've been discussing today, and ideally, inspire them to stay on the path of transformation and sexual enlightenment.
Awesome, and I'll have the link and the description as well below. So
it's a great little DVD.
Yeah, great. And I must say that I have downloaded a copy of it, and I've gone through it as well, and I really highly recommend women, if you're single or not, it's the work that you need to do with yourself first. So it's everybody. So, Freddy, before we close for today, I want to ask this question, which I've been asking every single speaker in this online temple, is in a line or two, what can you say about the rising feminine in this moment?
Yeah. Well, for the woman in this time, it's really about connecting in a positive way with their sexual aliveness and their goddess and their connection to every other living being, be it a man or a woman or a child or animal of the earth. So just to be in that place of mothering, nurturing, strength, and also learning practices to draw consciously on that sexual energy, because that is really a key to a listening that's been around forever in terms of creativity and pleasure. And that doesn't look sexual when it shows up in our work or in how we're raising our children or how we're being with our neighbor. Yet that's what the world needs now. So as women come more and more into their power, to keep doing practices that can allow them to draw on something that has its own intelligence, which is that sexual life force energy. Yes, and it's such a beautiful way to experience pleasure. Like, why not? You know, it's in you. Right. Sexual meditation is really invaluable. I mean, forever people have been masturbating and again, making love and creating babies and life and having fun. But even the self-love sexual meditation is very powerful in terms of how we can become more conscious of how that energy exists as a beingness. Thank you so much, Freddy, for your presence and sharing this divine masculine presence in this Rising Feminine online temple. I'm so honored, and I'm sure that the women listening would have gathered some nuggets for them to work with as well. Thank you so much. Thanks, Janita.